Donald Trump's considering doing away with the quarterly earnings report, or at least asking the SEC to do that. The quarterly earnings report often drive conversation here on this program. Now, the president says the outgoing CEO of Pepsi, Indra Nooyi, talked to him about it recently.
This took place when I had, as you know, the world's top executives, among the world's top executives, and the head of Pepsi-Cola, a great woman who is now retiring. She said, because I asked, what could we do to make it even better? And she said, 2 times a year reporting, not quarterly.
The way it works now, public companies must disclose sales, profits and their balance sheet 4 times a year, and anything that's material to the companies. Now, this has been the law since 1934 with the Securities and Exchange Act. It, of course, followed the 1929 market crash and the Great Depression. Donald Trump's plan would move to an H1 and H2 half-yearly reporting season, similar to what happens in Europe, although many European companies that are also listed in the United States or do have major business and investors from the United States do follow the quarterly reporting season for that reason. The US CEOs constantly complain about short-termism and say that the quarterly season requires them to miss long-term trends. Christina Alessi has been speaking to investors. What do they make of this call on the quarterly report?
Well, investors don't like it because it's less visibility for them into a company and how technology and other factors are changing their business on a fairly fast basis, right? You talk about technology and the way it impacts companies. Investors want to know real time. They want to know even more frequently what's going on, not less frequently.
I guess, though, the argument is always this long-term perspective versus short-term information. I mean, CEOs, those I've spoken to sort of say, yes, it does require you to keep the street happy on a quarterly basis, and that sometimes requires you to take decisions short-term that you wouldn't do long-term.
Well, one legendary hedge fund manager I spoke to today, Stan Druckenmiller, said he doesn't buy it. He doesn't buy the fact that just because a company has to put out quarterly earnings, they can't have a long-term vision. And one of the things that he points to is Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, he says, has done it. And he also put out this, Druckenmiller also put out this statement: this is the most myopic president in history, tweeting every hour. I find it very rich that he's proposing this with some veil that it's going to help companies think long term. So he's calling BS. And he says, as an investor, I think I find it troubling. We'd like to know what's going on with our companies. I think the president can lead by example and tweet every 6 months. So asking the president to take some of his own medicine there.
Listen to Alan Valdez, who you're familiar with from the Stock Exchange, and what he had to say on the question of quarterly versus half-yearly.
I think what you'd see is, say Netflix, if you go to 6 months, reports in January. No, Apple may report in February. If Netflix has a bad 6 months, that may weigh on the whole industry, and for no reason at all. I don't go for that. It's usually from these companies that are bleeding money, you know, whether it's from the Trump casinos at one time to Elon, who's doing $1 billion a year, he's burning through. You know, I'm an investor in a lot of equities. You want to see what's going on. You want to know what's your stock, what you put your money in, how it stands on a quarterly basis. I think it's fair for the investor. Stick with the quarters.
Except it's the level of detail in the quarterly, and it's the way in which a single number can be picked upon as a barometer for the entire well-being of the group.
You make an excellent point, and in your intro, you pointed out that European companies, I mean, regulators there only require companies to report on a bi-yearly basis. But here's the thing. The quarterly reporting in the U.S. engenders a lot of trust in the U.S. capital markets. And some analysts have argued that reporting on a regular basis actually means that U.S. companies are valued more highly because you can see their results on there's more transparency.
So, is it likely that the president's call, which of course backs up what Elon Musk said in his statement,
wow.
I'm not sure, yes, necessarily we want to go down that road.
Well,
but is it likely, as there is, that the SEC is going to change this, or are we just enjoying a nice bit of silly season in the summer?
I think there's serious consideration going on based on what I'm hearing. So we might see a change.
All right.